I kissed my straight roommate. The day I went to surprise my boyfriend, Julian, was meant to be one of the best days of my life, but instead it left my heart shattered into a million pieces. Now that I look back at the moment, it's still one of the best days of my life because I met Ben. I've been counting down the days, picturing the smile that would light up Julian's face when he saw me at his doorstep, clutching a bouquet of roses and a heart full of love. Julian and I had been dating for 5 years, but 6 months ago he got a new job that meant he had to go to a new city. I was so excited to see him at long last, to finally hug him, kiss him, and tell him how much I missed him. I knocked on his door, smiling from ear to ear. "Who's there?" Julian called out. "Delivery," I replied, altering my voice to conceal my identity. It seemed Julian must have been expecting an order because he opened the door quickly without another word. However, the moment the door swung open, my heart broke. There he was, Julian, entangled in an intimate embrace with another man. My voice caught in my throat as I stammered, "Julian, what's going on?" He turned pale, releasing the other man from his arms immediately. Desperation filled his eyes as he hastily tried to straighten himself up, his voice quivering with guilt. "Max, it's not what it looks like. Please, I can explain." Tears welled in my eyes, blurring my vision as I dropped the bouquet on the ground. With a lump in my throat, an aching pain in my chest, I whispered, "You said you loved me. How long have you been lying to me?" I didn't wait for his answer. The crushing reality of his infidelity was more than I could bear. I turned and fled from the scene, not wanting him to see me cry. It wasn't until I got to the bus station that I realized my wallet was nowhere to be found. Panic welled up inside me as I checked my pockets, realizing the only thing I had was a crumpled up piece of paper containing the recipes of a dish I had intended to cook for Julian. I tossed it out immediately. With no money, no place to stay, and no way back, I found myself standing on the side of the road, my thumb out, hoping for a kind stranger to give me a ride. I stood there for over an hour until a bus pulled up on the curb. The driver offered me a sympathetic smile as I explained my predicament. As I boarded the bus, my eyes scanned the interior of the place to sit. The bus was fairly crowded, and my heart sank at the prospect of a long journey with no seat. But then, just as I was about to resign myself to a standing position, I noticed a guy engrossed in a novel. He glanced up and met my gaze. With a friendly smile, he removed his bag from my empty seat beside him, inviting me to sit down. "Thanks," I said, grateful for the small act of kindness. I settled onto the seat beside him, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. He returned his attention to his book for a moment before looking at me again. "Long journey ahead, huh?" he remarked. I nodded, trying to hide the sadness in my eyes. "Yeah, it's a bit of a trek back home." He extended his hand. "I'm Ben." I shook his hand, introducing myself. "I'm Max." As the bus rumbled down the road, our conversation flowed naturally. Ben and I talked about our destinations, our reasons for traveling, and briefly about our lives in general. I learned that Ben was a writer who decided to travel to get some inspiration. He was shocked to find out I was a graphics illustrator and considered using my services for his new book. As if the universe was in support, we discovered that we were both heading to the same city, and that he had been planning to stay in a hotel until he could sort out his accommodation. A sudden interruption came in the form of a phone call. Ben's expression shifted as he answered, his voice hushed. "Hello? Oh, you're calling the room reservation? But I confirmed it yesterday. Are you sure there's nothing available?" He listened for a moment before sighing. "Alright, thanks anyway." Ending the call, Ben looked at me with a mixture of frustration and resignation. "Seems like my hotel reservation just got cancelled. They say they have no rooms left." I raised an eyebrow, feeling a bit sorry for him. "That's tough luck." Ben nodded. "Yeah, I'm not sure where I'm going to stay now. Do you know any good hotels around?" he asked. I thought for a moment. Then a thought crossed my mind. "You know what? I've got a spare room back at my place, and I'm in need of a roommate to help with the rent. Would you be interested?" I asked him. Ben hesitated for a moment, his brow furrowing as if he was weighing the pros and cons. He seemed surprised by the offer, perhaps even taken aback by the hospitality. "Are you sure about that?" I chuckled. "Yes, as long as you're okay with having a gay roommate," I said. Ben's warm smile widened, and I couldn't help but notice the intricate shades of hazel in his eyes. "Sexual orientation doesn't matter to me. What's important is that you're a decent person, and so far you seem like one," he said. As we arrived at my apartment, I watched Ben took in his new surroundings, making himself at home almost immediately. He dropped his bag on the couch and started to explore. It was an unfamiliar feeling to have someone other than my ex, Julian, in his space. I led Ben to his new room, but as he continued to familiarize himself with the apartment, he stumbled upon a picture frame on the mantelpiece. "Hey, is this your boyfriend?" Ben asked me, holding up the picture. My heart tightened. The pain of the recent breakup was still very fresh in my mind, and my emotions got the best of me. I reacted impulsively, snatching the picture from Ben's hand and tearing it in half. "Max, are you okay?" Ben asked gently, sensing that something had deeply affected me. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I struggled to compose myself. "I don't want to talk about it," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. For the rest of the night, Ben didn't touch anything else, and it made me feel terrible. I could sense that my outburst had left an awkward and uncomfortable atmosphere in the space that was supposed to be our new shared home. I didn't want him to think that I was some weird guy with anger issues, so I thought of a way to make it up to him. The next morning, I was determined to make amends for my previous night's outburst. I decided to try a new recipe I'd found online, hoping to win him over with a delicious meal. The aroma of the cooking filled the kitchen as I chopped ingredients and stirred pots. Just as I was setting the table, Ben walked into the kitchen. I watched as his eyes lit up at the sight and scent of the food. "It smells nice," he said. I quickly served him a generous plate of the dish I'd prepared and pushed it toward him. "I would like to apologize for yesterday. I didn't mean to act that way," I told him sincerely, my eyes locked onto his. Ben chuckled, his laughter washing away the tension that had been between us. "It's fine. Harsh breakup? I get it," he said. He picked up his fork and knife, ready to dig in. "And thanks for the food. I'm really hungry." As he took his first bite, I watched anxiously, eager to hear his thoughts on the food. However, my anticipation quickly turned into concern as I saw Ben's expression change. He coughed and choked, gasping for air. Panic surged within me, and I rushed to get him a glass of water. "Here, drink this," I urged, handing him a glass, my hands trembling. "Are you okay, Ben?" Ben took the glass of water from me, his face still flushed from choking. He took a few sips, and his breathing gradually returned to normal. Once he had fully recovered, Ben managed a small smile and cleared his throat. "Sorry about that. Now I know your cooking is so good that it takes my breath away." I chuckled at Ben's sarcastic comment, relieved to see him trying to make light of the situation. "I think it's the salt. I'll remember to tone it down next time," I responded with a playful grin. As evening descended, I noticed Ben's phone buzzed repeatedly with incoming calls, each one going unanswered. Ben didn't seem bothered by it, and I got curious. I didn't really know much about Ben. We had shared stories, laughed, and even confronted some awkward moments, but there was still much about him that remained a mystery. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my inquiry casual. "You're getting quite a few calls there, Ben. Everything okay?" He looked up from the book he was reading, his expression momentarily distant. "Oh, it's nothing, Max. Just some family stuff. But I'll sort it out later." His response didn't fully satisfy my curiosity, but I didn't want to press him further. After all, it was still very early in our friendship, and it felt too soon to dig into his personal matters. "It must be your girlfriend, right? Giving you a hard time, huh?" Ben chuckled nervously at my comment, his laughter not quite reaching his eyes. "Something like that," he replied, vaguely, seemingly hesitant to delve into the topic. As days turned into weeks and months, Ben and I went from being mere roommates to genuine friends. Our daily life together became an adventure, particularly in the kitchen. We would take turns cooking, and while Ben could only make pancakes to save his life, I was even worse. Julian had been the chef in our relationship, and after he left, I had resorted to ordering takeout or microwave meals. Once I attempted a 3-course meal that resulted in burnt dishes in a smoke-filled apartment. Ben couldn't stop laughing, and we ended up eating Ben's pancakes for 3 days. Our evenings often found us in the cozy corners of our apartment, bonding over drinks, and I enjoyed our time together. Ben was smart, and he talked about life with so much wisdom. I wondered if he was truly 27. I didn't think of Julian as much as I did before. Instead, I spent my nights thinking about the impossible future where Ben would see me more than just a roommate. Throughout our late-night conversations, there was one aspect of Ben's life that remained somewhat elusive: his family. He never spoke much about them, and when the topic arose, he would offer only vague details. I couldn't help but notice the subtle avoidance, but I respected his boundaries and never pushed for more information. It was clear that Ben had his reasons for keeping his family at arm's length, and I knew that he would share what he felt comfortable sharing when the time was right. I too had my own trauma that I couldn't bring myself to talk about, and I couldn't help but wonder if he had noticed too. Was he curious to know more about me, like I was? While I worked on my laptop, the gentle sound of typing filling our room, I couldn't help but steal glances at Ben, who had nestled himself into the corner of the couch with a book. It was as though he had brought the entire library in his backpack, and watching him read became a delightful distraction. Every so often, I'd glance over my laptop screen pretending to check on my progress, but really just taking the opportunity to admire Ben's concentration. After a while, I couldn't resist the urge to strike up a conversation. "What are you reading?" I asked, a genuine curiosity in my voice. Ben looked up from his book, a soft smile gracing his lips. A cookbook, he replied, his answer catching me off guard. Why? I asked, surprised by his unexpected choice of reading material. Ben's smile widened, his eyes filled with a warmth. So I can cook something really nice for you. What's your favorite meal? He asked. I couldn't help but be taken aback by his sweet gesture. Porridge, I said, a blush creeping up my cheek. Ben nodded and continued reading. I couldn't help but smile to myself. My heart fluttered as I watched him, the realization slowly dawning on me that what I felt for him was more than just friendship. One sunny afternoon, I decided to take a short nap while Ben was working on his novel. I closed my eyes but found it difficult to sleep, especially since Ben was looking quite handsome after he'd gotten a shave. I heard a faint knock at the door. Moments later, the knock came again, this time more insistent. Ben finally looked up, his brow furrowed in confusion. With a sigh, he got up from his spot and walked towards the door. I assumed it was a neighbor, and I tried to catch snippets of their conversation. The voices were hushed, and I couldn't make out much, but it was clear that Ben was talking to a woman. The conversation seemed to go on for quite some time, and I couldn't help but wonder who this unexpected visitor was. As I lay there pretending to be asleep, my mind raced with questions. Who was this woman, and why had she come to see Ben? I stole a quick peek, making sure they were still occupied, and then closed my eyes once more. That night, thoughts ran through my mind, and the trauma that I'd been fighting so hard to suppress was triggered. Silent tears streamed down my cheeks, and I couldn't help but sob quietly into my pillow. The room was shrouded in darkness, and I felt utterly alone. The weight of my past and my present struggles bearing down on me. My greatest fear had always been the prospect of being left behind, being abandoned. It was a fear born from the scars of my past, from growing up as an orphan with no family to call my own. It was a fear that had been heightened by the betrayal of Julian, my ex-boyfriend, who had left me heartbroken and alone. In the quiet of the night, I couldn't shake the certainty that Ben, too, would eventually leave me. It was clear that he had a family. I didn't understand why he left them, but of course, it was none of my business. We were just roommates, and he didn't owe me any explanation. I had bought this situation upon myself by asking Ben to be my roommate, despite the fact that my true motivation had been a desperate desire to not be alone. It was a truth that I had been reluctant to acknowledge, even to myself. I had convinced myself that it was a practical decision, that sharing my apartment with Ben was a great way to take care of rent, that I was doing him a favor. But I had been driven by an all-consuming fear of solitude. I had craved companionship, someone to fill the void that had been left by Julian's absence, and yet, in my attempt to escape solitude, I had placed myself in a situation where the fear of abandonment loomed larger than ever. "Hey Max, are you okay?" I heard Ben ask. I shook with surprise, realizing that I hadn't been aware that he had stepped into my room. My cheeks flushed with embarrassment, as I hastily wiped away my tears. I'm fine," I stuttered, wiping my tears quickly. But Ben didn't seem convinced by my feeble attempt to mask my emotions. He moved closer. "No, you're not okay," he said gently. "You're upset. I know we have an unspoken rule about our privacy, but I would like you to confide in me." His words pierced through the walls I had erected around my emotions, and I felt a fresh wave of tears threaten to spill. I swallowed hard, my voice quivering, as I finally allowed myself to speak the truth. I'm scared, Ben. Scared that you'll leave, just like everyone else." Ben listened in silence as I continued to pour out my fears and insecurities. I told him about the family I never had, about how I grew up wishing I could have a normal life like everyone else, and how Julian broke up with me. Ben's expression softened, even further as he reached out to hold my hand. "Max, I'm not going anywhere," he assured me. "You're not alone in this, okay?" I felt embarrassed for acting so vulnerable, as though I was a child in need of comfort. A small teary smile tugged at the corners of my lips, as I looked into his hazel eyes. "Thank you, Ben. I don't know what I would do without you," I whispered. "And you never have to find out," he replied. Then he leaned down and planted a kiss on my forehead. To lift my spirits and help me forget the pain of my breakup with Julian, Ben decided that a night of drinks was in order. He disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a couple of bottles. "We're gonna get drunk tonight, Max," he declared, pouring us both generous glasses, "so you can forget about that cheating scumbag." I couldn't help but chuckle at his determination. "Alright, Ben, but only because you're the best roommate and friend a guy could ask for." As the night wore on, my inhibitions began to slip away under the influence of alcohol. I couldn't resist the temptation to tease my ex-boyfriend, Julian, who had accused me of so much heartache. "You know," I slurred, leaning in closer to Ben, "he wasn't even a good kisser." Ben, equally tipsy and playfully competitive, raised an eyebrow. "Oh really? How would you know?" he asked. I decided to demonstrate, mimicking my ex-boyfriend's less than impressive kissing style. I leaned in, my lips hovering just inches from Ben's. Our lips met briefly, but Ben's phone chose that moment to ring. He groaned in frustration but refused to answer it. I, however, seized the phone and with a mischievous grin put it on loudspeaker. Ben, please, we miss you. Just come back home and we could talk things out, a woman's voice on the other end of the line pleaded. In a sudden and unexpected move, Ben snatched the phone from my hand, his expression tense and conflicted. What the hell is wrong with you? Ben yelled. He swiftly turned and walked out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him with a resounding thud. Alone in the apartment, I couldn't shake the nagging questions in my mind. Who was the woman on the phone? Was Ben married? In an attempt to drown my thoughts and emotions, I poured myself another drink. I took sip after sip, trying to find solace in the numbing effect of the alcohol. In my tipsy state, I stumbled into my bedroom and collapsed onto my bed. The next morning, I woke up with a slight headache, the lingering effects of the alcohol from the previous night. As I groggily rubbed my temples, the memories of the evening rushed back. I kissed Ben. I smiled to myself for a few seconds, but then I recalled how the evening had gone wrong. Why did I answer Ben's phone, intruding into his personal life like that? I checked Ben's room, half expecting to find him there, but he was nowhere in sight. Instead, I noticed the cookbook he had been reading before, still open to a particular dish. Guilt gnawed at me as I realized how I had disrupted our evening together with my impulsive actions. I decided that the least I could do was to make it up to him by preparing the dish he had been interested in. As I focused on preparing the dish from Ben's cookbook in the kitchen, I suddenly heard the door open. I turned to find Ben entering, holding a bag of takeout food. Bought us food, he announced, extracting the containers from the bag. What are you cooking? I couldn't help but smile at his timing. This, I replied, pointing to the picture in his cookbook. Ben burst into laughter. Seriously? He asked. I'm really sorry about yesterday, and I wanted to make it up to you. The page was open in your cookbook, and I guess this was your favorite meal. I put in some extra effort on this, I explained. It's not, Ben replied. I was speechless, but before I could dwell on his response, a distinct smell of burnt food filled the air. I turned back to the stove to find my cooking had gone awry, and I let out a dramatic sigh, turning off the gas. Ben couldn't stop laughing. So what did you buy? I asked, clearly upset. My favorite, he told me, a playful twinkle in his eye as I began to dish out the meal into 2 plates. My face lit up with delight as I saw what he had gotten. It was porridge, my absolute favorite. I couldn't contain my excitement. This is my favorite, I exclaimed. Oh, I didn't know, Ben responded with a smirk. I'm really sorry for yelling at you yesterday, and I wanted to make it up to you, he continued. We stared at each other for longer than normal. We should eat, I said, breaking the silence. After that day, the relationship between Ben and I became strangely formal and guarded, like we were afraid of crossing each other's boundaries. A new neighbor, Deborah, moved in, and it didn't take long for her to take an interest in Ben. She would often come over to our apartment building, and I found myself in the position of unwitting confidant as she sought my advice on how to get closer to him. Are you in love with Ben? Deborah asked me one day. What? I asked, surprised by her question. You talk about him with so much love, Max. I see how your eyes light up every time. That's love, Deborah replied. My heart raced, and I felt a lump in my throat. I couldn't deny the affection I felt for Ben, but I wasn't ready to confront these emotions or share them with anyone, especially not Deborah. I quickly denied it. No, I replied, my tone defensive. We're just friends. Besides, Ben is straight. Are you sure? She asked me again. Yes, I lied. I watched silently from the sidelines, feeling both jealousy and insecure. It seemed as though I was losing my place in Ben's life to his persistent newcomer, but I remained withdrawn, unwilling to voice my concerns. However, as time passed, Deborah's visits gradually became less frequent, until they eventually stopped altogether. Maybe I was right about Ben's marital status, because no man in his right mind would refuse a lady as beautiful and as nice as Deborah. The strain in our relationship had begun unbearable, and eventually Ben couldn't take it anymore. Max, we need to talk, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I sighed, realizing that it was time to address the unspoken tension between us. Alright, Ben, what's bothering you? Ben took a deep breath before responding. I can't ignore how distant we've become, Max. It's like you're pushing me away, and I don't understand why. Ben, I know you're married, I said. I know you'll eventually leave to go back to your family, and I'll be alone again. Ben chuckled in disbelief. Max, you've got it all wrong, he began, but I interrupted him. It's the only reason I can think of why you would refuse someone as wonderful as Deborah. I also saw you talking to a woman outside once, and that phone call, too. Was that your wife? I asked, my heart aching. Immediately, Ben closed the distance between us, his hand cupping my cheek, and he leaned in to kiss me. Shocked, I pulled away, my heart pounding. "What are you doing, Ben?" I stammered. "Max, I'm gay, but I've been too afraid to come out. So I left home because my parents found out, and they were disappointed because I couldn't be the son they wanted," Ben confessed. "I wanted to be free." Ben's fingers reached out and gently traced the outline of my hand. "The first day we talked on the bus and you told me you were gay, something shifted in me. I loved how bold you were about your identity. It has never stopped you from being so loving and caring. I love how you pour out your heart into things, even though you know you might mess it up," Ben said, letting out a small affectionate laugh. His words touched my heart deeply, and the pieces of the puzzle that had confused me for so long began to fall into place. I closed the distance between us and kissed him deeply. "Do I kiss better than your ex?" Ben asked. A soft chuckle escaped my lips as I pulled back just enough to meet his gaze. "Let me check again," I replied with a grin, and I leaned in to kiss him once more. Ben and I did everything together from then on. We moved on from being roommates to sharing the same bed. Our nights were filled with whispered conversations, stolen kisses, and the bliss of falling asleep in each other's arms. One evening, as we shared a quiet moment in our couch, I broached the topic that had been weighing heavily on my heart. "Ben," I began, "I want you to have closure with your family." "Max, I told you they disowned me when they found out I was gay. There's no closure to be had. The only person that cares about me is my sister." I reached out and gently took his hand with my thumb, tracing circles on his palm. "I understand that, but I also know how much it means to you. You left home because you wanted to be free. But deep down, I think there's a part of you that still carries the weight of their disappointment." Ben sighed. "Maybe you're right, but I can't bear the thought of leaving you alone." A small smile played on my lips as I leaned closer, my forehead resting against his. "You won't be leaving me alone. I'll be right here, waiting for you. We can get through this together, Ben." There was a moment of silence. "I'll go," he finally said. "For us. For closure. And for a future we can build together." Tears welled up in my eyes as I hugged him tightly. The time Ben was away felt like an eternity, but I was determined to make the most of it. With him gone, I threw myself into various pursuits, each day a new opportunity for growth. My work became a welcome distraction, and I poured my energy into it, knowing that it was part of building a better future for us. I used my time to confront my own abandonment issues, seeking solace in books, meditation, and self-reflection. I knew that for our relationship to thrive, I had to be the best version of myself. I also practiced harder to become a better cook without relying on YouTube or cookbooks. However, as a week turned into months, I grew worried. Was he ever coming back? One seemingly ordinary afternoon, a knock on the door stirred a rush of excitement within me. My heart pounded with the possibility that it might be Ben at the door. I hurried to answer, but it wasn't Ben. It was Julian, my ex-boyfriend. "What do you want?" I asked Julian, unable to hide my disappointment. "Were you expecting someone else?" Julian asked me. "Yes, my boyfriend," I replied. "Look, Max, I'm so sorry for what happened. I wasn't thinking. I miss you a lot, and I want you back," Julian said, handing me my wallet. I couldn't help but laugh as I took it from him. "Really? After all this time? You must think I'm stupid. Just leave," I told Julian. But Julian insisted, claiming that he had nowhere to go. "I know you can't help being alone," Julian said. "It would interest you to know I'm much better now," I shot back. Reluctantly, I allowed him to come in, but I made it clear that he had to leave the next day. I prepared dinner for both of us. It was the least I could do for someone that I'd once cared about deeply. I stayed in the living room, working on my laptop while Julian watched TV. His laughter grated on my nerves, a reminder of the time when we were close, and it now felt out of place. Then I heard the sound of the front door opening, and I turned to see Ben standing there with a clear frown on his face. I rushed to explain, catching up with him as he tried to leave. "Ben, it's not what you think. I can explain," I said. Ben, upset but trying to hide it, looked into my eyes, searching for the truth. I held him close. "I would never do anything to hurt you. I've waited 3 months to tell you that I love you, and I won't let someone like Julian ruin this." For the first time, I had used the word love to describe my feelings for him. Julian couldn't believe his ears. "I missed you so much, Max. I thought you got tired of waiting for me," Ben said. He wrapped his arms around me, and we kissed passionately. We didn't even notice Julian feeling the awkwardness. Julian quickly packed his things and left, but not before Ben thanked him for cheating on me. "I love you, Max," Ben told me. "I love you too, Ben," I replied. As Ben and I reunited, our love was deeper than ever. He told me about confronting his parents, and I shared with him the closure I had finally found with Julian and everything I learned in his absence. Ben then asked if I would like to join his family for Christmas in December, and I couldn't have been happier to be part of our new family, filled with love, forgiveness, and a future full of promise. The end. Have you ever had a roommate who became more than just a friend? Share your experiences in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.